I left my home to record the world before it ends. To find out what is this season and why is it ending. I cycled across the earth until I came upon a strange valley and met the last remaining inhabitants. A widow, her son, an old artist, a community organizer, a reclusive monk. I was with them in the final moments before the evacuation. Who are they? What kind of power shaped their lives? And how is it connected to what will happen to us? If the answers aren't in my journal, if these lives aren't captured here, they'll be lost in the turning of the season.
All right, welcome to Wise Up On Air. Damien Kastbauer, software product manager here at Audio Kinetic. We got some excitement lined up. We're going to talk game audio. We're going to talk interactive sound. We're going to talk music with emotions. We're going to dig into sonic storytelling, in-game binaural recording. I know folks are on the edge of their seat about that. This is a super cool feature that really speaks to the art form. I'm joined by some special guests who I'd like to introduce to you now. And so without further ado, let me welcome the folks behind Season, A Letter to the Future. How's everyone doing?
Hey. Hello. Hello. It's going great.
Okay. So the audio for this game is fantastic. I know we're going to dig deep into it and uncover some of the really cool, interesting, technical, and emotional things that you've surfaced. But let's get some introductions out of the way. And so I'll hand it off to you, Spencer, to introduce yourself.
I'm Spencer Doran. I'm a composer, sound designer, and independent researcher based in Portland, Oregon. And I was the audio director and composer for Season, A Letter to the Future. Season is a meditative exploration game from Scavenger Studio out of Montreal, and I worked with a team there. And you play as a young woman in a secluded village who is sort of tasked with saving the memories from a civilization that's on the verge of collapse, you could say.
I come from a little village in the mountains. No one has left here since before I was born, but our lives changed overnight.
There's kind of a cataclysmic event that is in the near future, which she has to travel through a landscape which is completely unfamiliar to her and document it and discover it for herself, maybe discover some of her own things about herself in the process.
What is this season that is about to end, and why is it ending? What exactly is out there that could turn the world inside out?
In doing so, she takes photographs as well as makes field recordings and then documents all of this in her journal.
I can't stop the change that is coming, but this time on Earth could live on in these pages. What it looks like, sounds like, how it feels to be alive right now.
I worked exclusively with Vibe Avenue, who are here with today, who did all of the Wise production on the project. I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is FX Dupas. I am one of the two co-founders of Vibe Avenue, co-founded the studio 11 years ago with Mathieu Lavoie, and we were acquired by SIDE Global a few months ago, so we became SIDE Montreal, where I currently act as a creative director and lead composer. So my role is to make sure that the games ship at the level of quality that we want in terms of audio.
I remember your friend Pate made this little bird. You wanted to protect it, keep it like a pet. But you took good care of it, and years went by. You'd done it. It was still intact.
I'm a composer, first and foremost. I did musical studies at the Conservatory in France, and then a master's in film scoring, and then a doctorate in interactive music for video games in Montreal. And but I also touched everything in the game audio world, did sound design, mixing, etc. In season, I was just doing overview of the project and giving advice and guiding the team and making sure that the game was sounding the way we wanted to.
You will chaperone these delicate things into the future.
Yeah, and it's been a pleasure to know you for so many years, your role in the community in Montreal, and yeah, your spirit of sharing and involvement. It's been fun to watch Vibe Avenue grow over these last years.
I'm Nikola Viel. In the 2010s, I've studied at the University of Montreal. I was learning classical composition in my courses. I had the opportunity to be in a class of FX Dupas about game audio. Younger, I was a gamer, but I never really considered it as a career. When I got my hands on Wwise for the first time, I fell in love. Putting my first sound in a game was like an epiphany. It felt so cool. I then became the student who does not listen in class, but has all the right answers. FX probably remembers.
If you have a better idea how to protect your brain from being destroyed, let's hear it. That's what I thought.
So FX noticed my skills in the course and invited me to an internship at Vibe Avenue. And the rest is history. I've been there ever since, passing from music intern to now audio manager. I'm now in charge of assigning the resources on multiple projects, and my passion for sounds manifests itself in doing complicated Wwise systems. For me, that's the fun part, how to make the sound interact with the game in a clever way. It's always cool. I love doing it for many things, music system, of course, but also sound design systems, interactive mixing, dynamic mixing, and everything. I dig into our projects, and I try to make everyone's work shine as bright as possible.
I check the pockets and find all kinds of little things, rocks, leaves, bits of string, and bugs.
Well, hello, my name is Manuel Silva. I'm an audio supervisor and senior sound design at Vibe Avenue, SIDE Montreal now, for about more than 8 years now. I was recruited by Manuel Silva at university, one of the co-founder at Vibe too, with FX. And I have grown with the company ever since. I specialize in high-profile sounds, and I give audio direction and guidance to the team. I make sure our projects have the highest quality audio possible.
This time, let's follow our intuition, gather some pieces, and see what happens. What magic might be hiding in this day, which will pass and never return?
I'm coming from Chile, so I have like another life. Before I study foreign trade in the past, I worked in foreign trade in Chile. And then for personal reasons, I came here to Canada. And well, I decided to follow my dream to study audio. Since I have memory, I was in love about sound design without knowledge, without knowing what it was. I was always wondering why Star Wars sounds like that, what they did to sounds like that. And also I have a classical formation and guitar in music. And well, I came here and I went to a private school to study for sound design. And then I went to university, Université de Montréal, to study, I guess the good translation is digital audio. So in season, I did a lot of sound design, a lot of sound design, voice editing, and mixing, and some debugging.
Such an interesting story for how they got to where they are today, if I may say so. I love hearing it, and it's just so cool to have, all of your superpowers combined in season A Letter to the Future in such a dynamic and emotional way. One thing I learned from playing the game and our conversations is just how much of you is in this game. The experiences you bring, and I think that's a really it's a really important thing to recognize, that we go to work every day, we have these jobs, we punch the clock and get paid, but we're also giving so much of ourselves to these experiences in the hopes of making these kind of connections with people. And to me, that's where this gets really exciting. So
it might be possible to pass on this blessing, to divide its power among the people you've met on your journey, to shepherd them into the next season.
Spencer, as a composer, you're quite an interesting character, and with everything that you experiment. I mean, personally, I have not been in touch that much with you during the process, so I would be interested in learning more about how you came into doing what you do, day to day, and why do you do the kind of music and research that you're doing.
Yeah, so the way that I came into working on Season was I have my own musical project. It's a duo called Visible Cloaks, with a number of albums that we've released over the years. And Kevin, who is the director, Kevin Sullivan of Season, was a fan of our music, and he just kind of cold call emailed me out of the blue. This was kind of right as the pandemic had happened, and I had a bunch of projects that I was working on, both doing sort of environmental sound design commissions and then touring, and had a big show at the Barbican in London and all this sort of stuff, and all of it got canceled. And a lot of people who, musicians that was in my shoes, didn't really know what I was going to do for the time being, and kind of just in the middle of, I think it was June or maybe May, sort of right when all this was sort of onsetting in 2020, Kevin just emailed me out of the blue being just hey, I'm a fan of your music. I'm working on this game that I've been writing for a number of years, and we're getting some funding to kind of finally start working on it. And would you be interested in working on it? And he sort of sent me a little pitch deck and a little video that he had cut together with a bunch of directors that I was familiar with. I mean, he's kind of coming from the film world more than the game world initially, so it was people like Terrence Malick. Immediately I was oh yeah, I don't know what I'm going to do with myself right now, but this sounds really interesting.
The future and all its uncertainty, the good and the bad, the hope and fear of progress. The loneliness of this season will be left behind. A collective project is coming.
It sort of intersected with a lot of my other research into music called Kankyo-ongaku, which is sort of a Japanese ambient environmental sort of history that traces back to R. Murray Schafer and all these soundscape researchers. And the premise behind the game really aligned very quickly with a lot of the stuff that I had already kind of been thinking about. So we sort of started working on it, and then the game got picked up by Sony to be an exclusive on the PlayStation. The needs of the team sort of grew exponentially, and that's when we brought Vive Avenue on to work on the project. And it was really great. I mean, again, this was my first ever time working in the game audio world, so it was a lot of learning as I went, but also sort of bringing an outsider perspective, both musically and based on a lot of my research that I had done. So yeah, I made a big kind of pitch deck to the team to sort of explain my process, and then being the composer as well as the lead audio director was very necessary, because a lot of the score and the sound of the game are very intertwined, and there's a lot of overlapping things that we're taking into consideration there. So it was definitely a lot of work, but a really amazing process to be involved in.
Well, and I can't help but wonder, having that outsider perspective, like you said, you didn't know what you couldn't do. And it's not every game that's reaching for an in-game binaural recorder.
It's okay not to understand everything right away. The moment may pass before you've gotten a firm hold on it. You, and others to come, will someday take the time to make sense of it all.
but also with the music systems and stuff too, like working with Nico here, like a lot of times I would be trying to describe my vision for what I wanted something to do, and it was not really how things are done per se, but he worked it out, and we sort of, I think, came to some really interesting processes of composing. I mean, I'm really interested in like generative composing and stuff like that, so it kind of dovetails into a lot of that. And now I sort of wish that I had Wwise available to drop into Ableton and do all this sort of same tricks that we used, you know, on my own composing process for my own like solo music and stuff. So.
And of course, it's super fun for a music integrator to have the challenge of figuring out how to do a system that is not think in the way of like, oh, this is going to work like this in Wwise. So, of course, that was super fun. Yeah.
If you can dream it, you can do it. And I think that there's, you know, something to that in your story for sure, because it does take a vision, and sometimes being unburdened by the way things are done traditionally is a really great way to approach something, because you don't know what you don't know. You never get a chance to be naive about things more than once. So it sounds like you were able to, again, find great collaborators to build these supportive systems for the game on all the different levels.
What would we do without you? What will we do without you? I think your camera and bag are still in your room. It's time to gather them up.
So who's excited to jump into this recorder bit? Because I can't wait. Because I mean, like, microphone in-game recording sounds, that's incredible. Shall we?
I've brought tools to record the sights and sounds of this season. I'll start by recording the only place I've ever known. Music from a trio of performers, the metal, the breeze, and my mind.
So that's when you record, and then once you have recorded, you can, like, this appears in a journal, and then you can play it back.
And it's the actual recording you did.
Simple, but actually pretty complicated to implement. So how does it work in a nutshell? The recorder is actually a custom coded plugin. So it was coded in C++ directly in Unreal using the Wwise API. So what happens is we record the master output of Wwise, and then the audio file is written in the save file of the game. And to play it back, we actually send this audio to Wwise input plugin, so we can then mix it back with the rest of the soundscape.
You make it sound simple, and at the same time, you know, I know that there's complexities to navigate there. Well, first of all, you're getting what the player is actually hearing and directed at. And then secondly, when it comes back through, you're weaving it through the Wwise mixing pipeline, and you're able to shape it or present it just as you would any other sound in the game.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool, and that extends to the binauralization of that sound as well.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, like if you play on PS5 with headphones, the sound is ambisonics, so you can have a really good feeling of, where the sound comes from. But yeah, as you say, like the binaurality was really important for us. So besides, being able to record virtually everything that is in the soundscape, we do have some very specific keepsakes or collectibles that are linked to, the narration and the story.
It got tricky too, because sometimes there would be two of them in your purview, and then we had to make one of them be the one that was being recorded, because the character says a line about a specific thing that they're recording. There's two things in their purview. We had to give priority over one versus the other, so there had to be an algorithm written that would sort of determine based on your distance, like percentage-wise, which was closer, which was not based just on like depth, but also left and right, and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. It makes me think that every collectible had two spheres. So there was an audio sphere, so that like it triggers the sound and then with the attenuation. But there was a second sphere that was like the sphere of from which distance can you actually record it. So from which distance do you hear it enough so that when you record it, it triggers a line. So exactly with the priority on top of that.
If you're like really far away from something, like say you just barely hear the wind organ thing you see in the image there, like it's just sort of on the edge of your perception. When you're recording it, you don't want that to be the thing that the character is talking about, because you might not even notice it when you're listening to it. You want it to be once you're in a range where it feels like it's in the center of your attention. And that took a lot of kind of playtesting to figure out what felt natural.
There are no mistakes, only wayward inspiration.
Once we had the system for the recorder in place, like the plugin was coded and everything was working, then the mixing aspect actually is where the magic really happened, because we really wanted to recreate a certain feeling. And if you have already done some field recording, that listening through headphones, to what a microphone hears is very different than just listening through your ears. They said your ears listen and the microphone hears. So when you put your headphones, suddenly there is no selective hearing like when you're just, listening with your ears. So we really wanted to kind of recreate this feeling. And so when it comes to the recorder, that you basically use all the time, because you're looking for sounds, important sounds for progressing the story and the narration. There are three different states. So you have the normal state, which is you don't have the recorder in hand, you're just walking around or biking around.
So everything on your sound field, you hear everything behind you and stuff, but everything is at a bit of a lower volume and low pass and high pass. That what makes it like a pastel, like it's nothing aggressive, nothing stands out too much. And then when you get your recorder out, it's like if your field of vision zoomed in, but for your ears. So you just hear what's in front of you louder.
And then the third state is when you are actually recording.
Public sleep music is a tradition of ours here. When the music ends, the village will begin to wake up.
Yeah, whenever you draw your recorder, so you have it in hand, first of all, the music is muted. And then all the 2D ambiances are also lowered a lot. And if there is a keepsake, the volume of the keepsake is really, really louder. so you can really hear it clearly.
I wish humans had evolved to sing instead of talk.
And so all the sounds in the 3D environment, as Nico said, become really more focused, like the cone attenuation is reduced, so you hear really what's in front of you, except for the keepsakes, because we wanted the player to be able to hear them even if they didn't face them. So the keepsakes, on the contrary, you can hear them really all around you. So these are really three very different mixing states. And regarding the keepsakes, they also have a different behavior before they are recorded and after they are recorded. Because before, we wanted them to stand out, so the player can really figure out, this is an important sound. But after they have been recorded, they don't need to take as much space in the soundscape. So basically, once they are recorded, the state changes and they are back to being more normal 3D elements. So, for example, if you have a cricket, you might hear it a lot before it's recorded, like very often. But once you have recorded it, then you hear it just from time to time. So basically, it really blends more into the rest of the 3D soundscape. And so now you can just continue to hunt for the other ones.
And this is like going back to wanting to draw the player's attention to certain things without them being obnoxious or like without them sort of disrupting the more meditative nature of the gameplay. And the collectibles were sort of what ended up being like the most crucial aspect of the recording. A lot of my philosophy about this game goes back to R. Murray Schafer, who sort of created the concept of the soundscape.
I think if you listen carefully, your life is enhanced. I think it becomes much more interesting. It's the same as looking carefully. If you can use your senses properly, and in art, we try to get people to use their senses, to listen carefully, to look carefully at things, that enriches your life.
In Vancouver, there was a group called the World Soundscape Project, which this other composer, Hildegard Westerkamp, was part of. And she has a sort of sound piece in which she's going to Vancouver Bay, and there's a really specific part of the beach there where you can hear the barnacles sort of hissing as the water recedes from them. But because Vancouver Bay is so close to the city, you're also hearing sort of the noise of the city off in the distance. You hear sort of like this, the white noise that a city sort of emanates.
But I'm trying to listen to those tiny sounds in more detail now. Suddenly, the background sound of the city seems louder again. It interferes with my listening. It occupies all acoustic space, and I can't hear the barnacles in all their tininess. It seems too much effort to filter the city out.
She narrates the aspect of sort of focusing in on the sound of the barnacle and literally low passing and high passing out all the other sounds that aren't in this frequency range, just to focus on these one little tiny sound.
Luckily, we have bandpass filters and equalizers. We can just go into the studio and get rid of the city. Pretend it's not there. Pretend we are somewhere far away.
And that's sort of what we ended up doing in this process we're talking about here, where we're sort of low passing things, high passing things that aren't in your direct purview, because we really wanted the feeling of getting this intimate kind of relationship with the sound that you're recording, and like zooming in, or like things getting even more clarity than when you're just listening to them.
These are the tiny, the intimate voices of nature, of bodies, of dreams, of the imagination.
Well, it's a lot of care into trying to ensure that these, systems for presentation are, again, getting out of the way, right? You're taking a lot of care to make sure that the experience is representative of what we as sound people know from, putting a pair of headphones on and heading out with a microphone. And you're trying to preserve the immersion while also, ensuring that they take notice of these important things. And again, great technology behind the scenes to try and make sure that these things flow smoothly and seamlessly as part of the player experience without exposing themselves, right? And for such a personal game and such a personal experience that you participate in the binaural side of things using 3D audio on the PS5, with the recorder throughout, it's just a natural showcase for what audio can be as part of an experience like this.
You're still hearing the barnacle sounds, and already they're changing. Alfred Tomatis says that high frequencies charge our brain and give us energy. I often hear these tiny sounds in my dreams. Those are the healing dreams.
Manu, you want to talk about the bike?
So before to talk about the bike itself, I want to say something about environments, and you will probably call me crazy, but the bike influenced the environment, the 3D audio in this game. So in many games, they fade in wind layer when you go faster. We did the same, but we take the same wind it's already playing in the game, and we change it by using an RTPC that follows the
speed of the bike.
Yeah. So when you go faster, the wind is more present in the mix, and also it's more the pitch is more higher.
So that means that if you go through 3D spheres that are already close to the cliffs or everything, you still hear those, but higher pitched and higher in the mix.
Yes. And there is a place, I think it's in the first ride, there is a tunnel with openings on your right side and a cliff. And what we did was we added 3D audio, wind gust, in each opening of the tunnel. So if you are walking in the tunnel, you will not hear it. But if you go faster on your bike, you will hear some kind of a boom, 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 and some kind of wind whistlings, which make this place pretty special to me because I really like this part of the game.
It's actually still pretty subtle, but there is a.
Hopefully everyone's listening on headphones.
Bump the volume and go listen to it like
Stereo sound is really paying off here because absolutely on that right-hand side, as you pass each window, you're getting that gust and that kind of almost Dopplering of the wind sound. It's fantastic detail. Wow.
Ambiances are the core of the contemplative aspect of this game, and it complements the recorder system mechanic tremendously. Since the player can record anything they want, we decided to hand place 3D audio instead of custom blueprints. So that gives us more freedom, artistic freedom. For instance, you can be in a section of the game and you can have 5 trees, and it's possible that each one has a different sound, different attenuation. And we did this with everything, with water, with the river, with the ocean waves. With some insects. There is one tree in the Caro village that we added some weird birds. Magic sounds. Winds, leaves, winds. And it's great. It's just a very nice feature.
The very special tree, yeah.
This is my tree. I love the tree. This one can't die. It's been through too much.
So this means that for a region, if you're in a closer, smaller space, you can diminish the volume of all the trees around you without having a custom 3D sphere for them, because you know you're in that room. You just use the state and you're good to go.
Let's go.
We have, a box for every location, like bigger location and smaller locations, because it's really easy to tweak things with that. If you know exactly where you are and you have a state for every place, it's very easy to, if you have sounds a little bit further away that you want to tone down, you can do it. You can fake some stuff, sometimes like occlusion, or that would be otherwise more difficult to do. So it gives you a lot of things that you can do to kind of fine-tune the soundscape, the general soundscape of the ambiences.
Perfect. And it's those little things that you add up over time with your technical pipeline, like how you're making those decisions, like having states for these things, because you're going to want to reach for those to tune things on a case-by-case basis. That just sets you up for being able to succeed when you get to that place where you're tuning things emotionally.
What if, on the other side of all our fears, is a better world? Or a worse one? What if it depends on what we do right now?
Yeah, exactly. So it's very much a preparation work, meaning that you don't even know you're going to use them, but you might as well have them.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's like painting, we have thousands and thousands of 3D audio everywhere there.
Stone and soil, water and wood, a collection of samples of the ecosystem of the valley.
Yeah, and, we are lucky to have somebody as patient as Manu to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah. For sure. It was time consuming, but on the other hand, we have the freedom, artistic freedom to create. So it was pretty cool. It was super cool to do that, yeah.
I wanted to capture this valley in a piece of art.
There is something that Nico said a long time ago. We were looking for silence without silence. So it was pretty important to find a good balance of that. We have everywhere we have sounds, but they are not annoying. The music is just perfect.
Yeah, it's so contrasting with other games that are more like bloody and gory and stuff. So this was like totally another focus. It was very cool to do.
I have doing games like really violence games, if you will. So start work in season was like change my mind. Like, okay, I need to change all my mindset to work in this game because it should be all balanced, quiet, but with no silence.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing that process of implementation was also kind of meditative, right? You could kind of just soak in the ambiences and, get everything sounding the way you like and then just, okay, yeah, move on.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah. But again, it was in my mind, you can achieve that state when you're authoring if you've got your tools, processes, and pipeline in place. Like if you're not fighting against your workflow, then you can enjoy that process. And it does sound like you're able to achieve that.
All right. Well, here I am. We can do this. Just need to decide.
Yeah, and Wwise was super important for this. Because obviously this could lead to a lot of performance issues, like in this kind of approach.
Yeah.
So, being able to really work on the priorities and voice stacking, really controlling the number of voices that we wanted to have at the same time. Like all the optimization part that came with this was also a lot of work. But I think we, with Wwise, we had the tools to do it well, and it works.
You can't buy tools like these. He made them. It's chaos. It's life. It's constantly changing. They might be incredibly valuable to a scientist on the other side of the world. There's even more of them, bigger ones, out at his work shed.
Yeah, and so you had other concerns gameplay-wise that would come up on occasion when it came to the more narrative aspects. But you didn't have to worry about a firefight breaking out and crushing your voice limits, So you had the luxury to tune that for, performance without the worry about it being destroyed at a moment's notice by gameplay.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's good. Nice luxury.
A face worn with the strain of creation. She is compelled to create, like how I feel compelled to document this season.
Personally, I had been working at Vibe doing like a lot of combat game. I had been working for years in D&D, Dark Alliance, and it's a game of combat which every sound is like almost iconic, powerful, violent, a lot of sub, we want noise, we want the impact, So then I came to season and my mind like, what we're gonna do with this? And the first thought was, we need to do something contemplative. We need to do something like melancholic. We need to create an ambience where we can feel nostalgic, And at the same time, personally, I was having a hard time with in my family for disease, memory disease, if I said. So it touched me a lot, this game about the mother. My wife cannot play this game for more than 15 minutes. She is not able to play it because for her it's like too deep, because we talk about memory and everything.
What an odd feeling. Like an absence, disappearing. The empty space fills itself back in until I forget that I forgot anything at all. I'm glad I'm only losing a few memories. If I lost too many, I wouldn't even know who you are.
My wife, I didn't really show her a lot of the project just because it was NDA'd. But one thing, right before this process had happened, her father passed away. And I was working on the music and sound design for like the Field of Memory, if you remember that part where there's a sort of flashback. And she just played it for probably about 2 minutes and just completely started sobbing.
I prayed to see you again. I didn't expect it would be in a dream. Life listens and then it does what it wants.
Yeah, I became very attached to that map over time. They were trying to cut that whole section of the game, but now it's just like a setting for a flashback. But yeah, there's a lot of the same sort of thing you're talking about, of it being very interconnected to personal experience and memory and sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we're parents, like Matt and I are parents. We do enjoy, like your typical shooter, but yeah, of course, working on this kind of game is really nice. Like, luckily, it's not the only one. For example, we have done a lot of VR games with the Montreal studio called Trebuchet. One of them is called Winds and Leaves, and you basically have to grow trees and forests. So it's a very, very Zen-like experience. The music also is pretty hybrid between acoustic instruments and electronics, and very, very interactive as well. And Nikola also did the music systems for those games. We wrote the music for this one. So we do have, like, luckily, other games that can nurture our more peaceful and creative side, so that we do love to work on those kinds of games. Nico?
Yeah, well, for me, for sure, a game with storytelling at the forefront and with like a more defined gameplay, which is like very much a story that has a beginning, middle, and end, and that is more of an adventure. I feel sometimes games have too much gameplay, and Season is a bit the opposite of this. It's more contemplative. It's more like you're doing your own thing, and you're learning out of curiosity, and you're not just like picking up audio logs and killing monsters. I really can connect to this kind of gameplay. And also, I know this is not popular, but a short game, I feel, is very good. You live an experience. There's nothing like, you don't try to stretch it. And of course, like anything that's more experimental is also very fun, because you can do very cool systems that are out of the box. We had a few games, like FX mentioned, Winds and Leaves, and also some prototypes sometimes that would never see the light of day, but that you can like try some stuff. And I think this scratches another itch, because like doing a shooter or something, you take care of a great mix, like it's cathartic and everything. But when it's more of an experience, you're trying to get something else, you get a different emotion from it. And I think it's like the best thing is variety, working on very many different types of games. So yeah, Season has a great part in this.
Wow, yeah. It's a long time goal of finding a video game that could make you cry, and certainly Season is a contender for that.
It's very intimate, and of course, in this context, it was super interesting to go into really the little details, because you can, because you can. And then as Manu said, it was really a change of mindset and change of perspective. It's a very, very special game in this regard. So I think we all loved the experience of, going to tweak all those little details to
make the perfect frog.
You said a word earlier that I want to bring back into the conversation: wind harps.
Oh yeah, Aeolian harp, you could also say, is the ancient Greek version of it.
Okay, and so what is it?
The history of these goes really far back, thousands of years. The game version is sort of based on the South San Francisco wind harp. It's maybe 3 or 4 stories tall. There are sort of tubes of air that the wind travels through and are tuned in a specific way that the air passing through them causes tonal qualities to arise. In some cases, it's also just a series of strings that are played by the air, or like sort of like the classic Greek alien harp is like basically just a harp that's placed in a very windy landscape. So the design of that also influenced the score in a way where we wanted there to be a mystical quality, which the score uses aspects from the Foley design to sort of trigger itself.
There's something eerie about an instrument that plays itself. I think the self-playing instrument needs to imply the presence of a person who isn't there, like this one does, to be properly eerie.
So there's parts of the winds that are blowing through the natural environment, which sort of are doubled in the way that the score is realized within Wwise. And maybe you could talk a little bit about Nikola.
So in Ting Valley, for instance, we had some big regions, and those regions, the music emanates from one particular spot, but then it's like it entices you to go in a certain direction because it's a huge sphere, and then there's an important spot at the middle. So those curves, those are like both a different layer of a sound, and it's like the closer you get, the more one layer goes down. And then the further you get, the more you have directionality, so the more you know which way you have to go.
Oh, I love a creative attenuation curve. There's so much potential, and you're really leveraging that opportunity that's there.
So I'll just play the 2 blend containers at the same time, and you'll hear some stuff. Hopefully. So the further you get from them, you start hearing the mallets. And then it slowly fades out. By the way, the infinite attenuation curve, that's a trick because when you stop those segments, it's a few segments of different lengths, but when you leave the big sphere, we wanted it to be able to finish and not just cut out. So it's set up on breaks, and since the attenuation is infinite, well, if you bike ride to the other side of the map, you'll continue hearing it until it ends.
Yeah, and then a big part of the design was that all of these different layers were abstract enough that could be kind of collaged and overlap with each other in a way that didn't create any sort of rhythmic dissonance or harmonic dissonance. So everything is done in the same key, in the key of C, actually. So it's really easy to sort of take all these different areas of the map, and as you sort of traverse through them, there's no hard stops, like he's saying, like you're sort of blending from one area into the other area in this way that you maybe don't even notice if you're not paying really close attention to what's happening.
Exactly, and since the sphere overlap, you can be directed to one side or another depending on what texture you're following. I don't know if anybody played it like that, but it's cool to do. Yeah.
Nice. Well, and I love the technical trick that you explained, and you, Spencer, in your retelling of it from the music side of it, it just blends seamlessly. Yeah, it really speaks to the level of care that sound and music have gotten for this title. It's a cool trick.
And there's a literal version when you're going down from Estelle's, the main character, from Estelle's village and just sort of descending down into the valley. There's this area where the music from her village and then the music from the valley sort of start to kind of crossfade with each other. And they're in the same key, but they have different tonal centers. You can feel this sort of overlap going from one mode to another mode. So if you just bike down really quickly, you might not notice it. But if you sort of slowly take your time, you can sort of see the way that there's different points at which the two musical volumes kind of overlap in the same way that like going from one environmental audio volume overlaps with the other. So we wanted there to be like these subtle things that you could pick up on if you're sort of closely listening.
And mirroring her emotional journey too, from where she was to where she's going, you know, the music juxtaposition as that transitions, again, all in support of this storytelling side of things. Was the music synced, or are they free floating and they can just kind of overlap at whim?
There's definitely some elements that are synced going from that environment to the other environment. The main backing is sort of like a string quartet that overlays between the two of them. And in the earlier part, there's like a piano piece that's in a major scale. And as you descend down, there's these sort of interlocking mallet percussion sections that come in more pentatonic scale that as you're going between the two of them, you can feel like they're interlocked rhythmically, but they're not really. The piano playing is so abstract, and then the string quartet, it does not have like a really defined pulse to it. So it's all sort of meant to sound as if it could go together, but it's not technically interlocking. But you know, all those rhythmic mallet sections are interlocking. So these sort of like little pools of things that interlocked that overlap with pools of things that don't, they sort of all sound natural together.
So yeah, like the first part is synced together and the second part is synced together, but the buffer between them, since it was like less rhythmic, we didn't need it to be synced. But I think the further you go into the bike ride, the more there is different percussions. Like I think in the tunnel, there's a different percussion than then when you're in the sort of post office, I guess. So yeah, those parts do have to be synced together.
There's one tricky aspect, which was that there's a state when it's time to sort of leave the main area. Nightfall has happened. You're sort of implied that it's time for you to move on. And when that happens, there's another sort of musical theme that comes in, which is rhythmic, which meant that we had to make sure that we killed all the other environmentally placed musical cues that had rhythms in them so that there wasn't any sort of clash, because it would have been a little too complicated to tempo sync everything. So yeah, we had to come up with a system for that.
Awesome. So that's fantastic. Transitioning between these sections, are they trigger volumes? Like, how do you know when you're leaving one and entering another? What was the behind the scenes on that?
As far as trigger points goes, there was a lot of things where we wanted to be able to be in between the two musical states. Like a good example is going from the plaza and sort of descending down into the field. There's a sort of abstract version of the piece and then a more concrete version of the piece that you're sort of blending between. And we didn't want that to happen too immediately. We wanted it to be sort of gradual, so there's multiple points in which it's almost like I think of a lot as a crossfader, just because used to DJ and do a lot of mixing. So you're sort of having a crossfader that's between the A point and the B point. You don't want it to just slide all the way over to the B point. You want it to be more gradual. So there's different spaces in between where you're sort of getting 80% of one layer and 20% of another, or 60% of one layer and 40% of another, until you're all the way 100% to the other direction.
And turns out the easy way to do this, because at first in the mock-up it was just spheres in Unreal, but it was hard to tempo sync correctly and stuff, and it didn't really need it to be in 3D. So the way we did it is you have an RTPC between the two songs, and it's totally a crossfade. So you have dozens of triggers on your path. So each time you cross a trigger, it slowly fades the RTPC. So it gives out exactly the result that Spencer was looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I made the original mock-ups for this just in Unreal, just by placing sort of spheres as audio emitters, not as, like a 2D procedural sort of thing in Wwise. So like a lot of what the Nikola was trying to do was basically just recreate my really kind of ham-fisted DIY way of trying to throw this idea together. All of this gets really tricky when it comes time to put out the soundtrack album, because then you have to sort of take a very living, very 3D, very spatialized musical experience and just bounce it down to stereo, 2 tracks, fixed time, replayable on an LP. So that was like a very long process for me. It was sort of creating this idealized version of that shift between the two environments.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what you're saying is the game's soundtrack writes itself when you're playing the game, but the game soundtrack outside of the game needs to be performed as if you were playing the game. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the use of the recorder also made it so that the music had to go in a certain aesthetic, because each time you get the recorder out, the music fades out. So you do need to be able to like have those continuous music pads and stuff, but not be like too intense or anything.
And it reminds me of early on in the game, you're just at the start and there's some humming, there's some narration happening in the background that you're just kind of hanging out and you're like, what's that? Tell me about that.
On the morning I leave home, I can smell breakfast cooking in the other room, and I can hear my mom's voice.
Yeah, just to talk a little bit about some of the philosophy behind these parts of the music system was, especially in this scene, you're sort of going between being inside of your house and then having these sort of intimate interactions with your mom. And so you're sort of walking around after talking to her, looking for these objects. So we needed there to be two different versions of the music bed. One, which it was like this piano piece. And then once you go into the conversation with your mom, you get the same piece, but it's a sort of heavily abstracted version of the same thing. This part with the humming had to be in the same key because all of those sort of systems are happening all at once.
Yeah, and the humming is actually not timed with the rest of the music because it's really abstract, and I feel like there's so much a human quality in the humming because it's not necessarily quite in tune or anything, so it feels really natural. And a trick also we did to make it even more natural is that it's cut in very many little pieces. So each small phrases are a different file, so that when you talk to your mother and you lean on the ground, so there's a wood cracking, and it interrupts her singing.
The floorboards creak. Mom hears it and turns to me.
You're up. What are you doing standing there? Time to get going. It's gonna be a beautiful morning.
We felt like it didn't need it to come in right away and just stop the music. We felt like you could get away with finishing the small fragment and just not starting another one. So that's another creative use of breaks instead of stops.
And you don't see the seam of it as much in that way, instead just like a hard fade out, which made it really obvious. And yeah, shout out Phyllis Gooden, who was the voice actress. Like, we had some sort of placeholder stuff in here, and then when we did the VO sessions, Kevin just gave her like a brief of like, oh, just kind of hum some things, and we'll take just do it for a couple of minutes, and we'll take what we can out of that. And she just kind of came up with this on the spot.
And what I loved about it is that when you're in your bedroom at the start, it's positioned in the left rear, because this is where the other room is positioned, where the voice is coming from, where the humming is coming from. And to me, it was just so natural sounding, the way that it's processed, the way that it's filtered, the positioning of it. It just kind of melted into the background in such a pleasurable way. And like you said, it all just kind of seamlessly works as you engage.
This book is supposed to make children afraid of the outside world. Every household has a copy, But it had its purpose in the old days, what with the chaos and violence and confusion, but it didn't work on you. You were scared of the images, but as soon as you could talk, you had questions. Are they hungry? Did they get enough sleep? Soon enough, the creatures became familiar. You dreamed of meeting them. They became your friends. Another moment when I began to realize what kind of person you are, that you were born to step outside of our lives here.
It feels like, again, like at each of these different features, you've really honored the intention of the game at the onset in support of it, the emotional journey that the lead character is on. So, and sound supporting that is all, seamless, free of the technology component. Of course, it's there, right? You have the tools. Wwise is certainly doing something here, but you've gotten it out of the way to allow sound to convey the emotion of the experience. And I think that's, for me, the core that runs through the whole conversation. Really nicely done. And those attenuation curves. Am I right? Totally.
A lot of the sounds, you can feel them as well as listen to them. Obviously, this game is very focused on the audio experience, which, for accessibility reasons, that's not perceivable by everyone. So we wanted the player to be able to sort of experience the sound, even if they're not able to hear it. The way the PS5 controller works is it's basically like an audio bus that takes frequencies from 500 hertz and below. So if you pitch things down into sort of like the vibration range, you can feel all these sounds, like the cricket chirping, you feel it buzzing when the chirps happen. Also, when you record the sound, you get the sound as haptic feedback in the controller to sort of add to the sort of tactile nature of experiencing the sound.
So whenever you are close to a collectible, you take your recorder in hand, the controller will vibrate. And so it also has an attenuation curve, so the closer you are, the more it vibrates. And it is especially interesting on PS5 because you have all that more sophisticated haptic feedback. So the controller also vibrates in the direction where the sound is. So for example, if the sound is to your left, then the left part of the controller will vibrate more. So you can also aim at the important sound environment with the help of the haptic feedback.
I've heard sounds that can heal the mind. It feels like this noise would do the opposite.
Right, operating on all the different levels of sensation that we have at our disposal. And this idea that you're using audio to drive that, I think, is so key because the care you've put into the sound, right, is not the kind of thing that you would want to recreate outside of the audio system. So being able to just leverage it as part of your tool set, send that audio stream, and even get positional information is just a great way to not only lend itself to the sound, but as you were mentioning, help guide people with their senses.
I've always wondered what's on the other side of this gate. Today, I'll find out.
What it sells the bike experience, and probably is the most immersive topic of this. It's the haptic feedback. In fact, like FX said, you should play this game with a PlayStation 5 controllers if you want to live the full experience of this, if you can do it.
Right, because for folks who haven't played it, you pedal the bike by alternating the triggers as if they were the pedals of the bicycle.
So yeah, the bike is one of those features that we needed to design it just right. We wanted the player feel the most realistic and cool experience riding the bike. There are several factors on this regard. For instance, there are two cool things about surfaces. First one is the bump. When you are
riding a bike,
and you go from asphalt to gravel, you have a little bump. Well, yeah, yes, we designed those for some key surfaces in the game. So just a little bump on the road, and it makes all the difference.
So as you're transitioning, instead of just crossfading from one surface to another, you're giving that kind of tactile sound and vibration to help reinforce the fact that you've transitioned material types.
Yes,
cool.
Exactly.
It's like a transition segment in the music system, but for the bike ride. You know?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So yeah, when we started to work on it, it was the first time we tried the resistance of the controller, you know. So to emphasize it, we added a custom haptic, a custom sound that coupled with this resistance. So that became the first pedaling strike of your bike. So you have a little like it's like doing sport in some way. So it's a really cool feeling, and you feel it. You're feeling like you are riding a real bike.
Basically, like the first few strikes when you start biking, the haptic feedback is very strong. So it gives a bit of the feeling of, you know, you're starting to bike, you have to press, you know, more on the pedals. And then after a few strikes, you know, like the bike is rolling. So then you switch to the looping parts of the surfaces and sounds.
And this is doubled with the trigger resistance as well.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. So for the normal ride, we use audiophile as sources. Sometimes we have to boost the volume like quite high, like because we want to have a different effect. But we add the graph as Wwise motion sources.
Yeah, so that's like the gravel or something.
And when we say Wwise motion source, what you mean is like authoring, you know, vibration that would go alongside the sound, but that vibration is just more interesting, whether it's patterns of vibration that are complementary to the sound, that feel more like the sound sounds. That's definitely, you know, it's an art form in itself.
So we have like audio loops for each surfaces and various sound from the bike chain and such.
It's like a 2-second loop. So you would maybe think that it gets annoying and you feel the redundancy, but since you also have a few bike loops from the same surface that are audio loops sent to Wwise Motion, then everything blends together and creates this randomization.
Yeah, so the loop is like less predictable.
Because you have multiple layers of haptics. You have the Wwise motion source, and you have the surface material audio loop that's contributing to the vibration in the controller. And I get it. Like all of that variation just lends itself to being less recognizable.
Let's go.
Yeah, and all this is modulated by the speed of the bike. So if you're riding faster, it feels more bumpy. Than if you're riding slower, it's smoother.
Yeah, it's a very tactile experience to pedal the bike because you're actively a participant in it, and all of the considerations you've made around the care of that experience and how it feels over time really makes sense, because it should be joyful when you're pedaling well and on your way. You wouldn't want to detract from that experience. So nice work. Yeah. And that all, like, again, back to this running theme of, getting the technology out of the way so that you can just experience the intention that the game has for you to be mindfully exploring this world and exploring this story. It really holds up, because that detail, I believed it wholeheartedly. So nice work. Spencer, you were giving a short introduction to this game, and I just want to say, there's an understated grace and beauty to the way that the story unfolds. It really is told across all of the different mechanisms that we have in games, right? Through interaction, through the storytelling, the narrative itself. And sound is woven in as such a fundamental piece. This is a contemplative game. It is a thinking and feeling game, if I may say. It feels like it was ripe for this treatment of sound and music.
Yeah, I would say that I worked, aside from Vibe Avenue, the person I worked the closest with on team was Kevin, the director, who had his own sort of vision for the entire way that the story was going to unfold. When you're doing recordings, it also triggers elements from the story that you're sort of uncovering, and there's this whole new vector for the writing process where the character would record something and then have their own internal monologue, which is written down in the journal. And a lot of what Kevin did was sort of work these tools back into the writing process, which became a whole other sort of space in which the game has emotional resonance, and the way that emotional resonance connects with the sound in the game. And the whole thing was very integrated with Kevin, and then with also just like the game designers of the whole project, as well as Vibe Avenue.
Did you have total freedom with how you were, working with Vibe Avenue? How did that collaboration between the two of you work? How did you balance maybe your vision or direction against the creativity, and how did that work?
It worked very natural. It helped that they had actually done all the sound design for the demo version of the game. They took PAX East, I think in 2019, I want to say. I came on the project in June of 2020. What I was sort of given starting out was basically this rudimentary version of what we landed up with, the bike mechanics, some of the level soundscape design, some things like that. So when the game got picked up by Sony in, I want to say, towards the end of 2020, they were the natural person to bring back onto the project, given that they already had familiarity with it. And yeah, as far as like what the constraints were, our only constraints were, time and budget. We certainly had enough freedom to experiment, which was something that I think is crucial in any project, to sort of land on things that do work, things that don't work. Eventually we had to rein it in and make some hard decisions down the line, but experimenting with them was very easy.
Yeah, I think we were more like there to say, okay, this is easily doable, this takes more work, so where should we focus our resources? Mm-hmm. And then at some point we got the ball rolling, we knew what Spencer was looking for, so it was a pretty cool collaboration for sure.
My approach to it is from outside of the perspective of working in Wwise, and they were the Wwise experts. I had more of the philosophical or musical direction that sort of helped us land on what we wanted this game to feel like.
It's fantastic, the collaborative pieces that I'm hearing weaving through the team across all the disciplines, having to be aware of sound, its influence, and its, storytelling possibility, sounds like it was a very deliberate piece of the development pipeline, not just between, yourselves, but also across all the other teams as well. Did that just happen? Was that just magic? Was there some intention of that from the start?
At first, we started out, kind of working in both directions, where they asked me what sort of sounds I would like to have in the world that would be important. And then they also created, narratives that had objects which would emit sound. So the design of what these sounds even were was coming from both ends. So a lot of the things that you see in the game, which are like automatic instruments or proto sound art kind of things like wind harps or like the organ that's played by the air, those are all things that I sort of came up with. And we just made like a master list of all these things that we wanted to have in the game, and then sort of ran it by the various departments of like, do we have enough bandwidth on the art team to make something, or can it be animated in these sort of ways? And this was trial and error based on playtesting too, where like the original iteration of the recorder, you could only record the things that we deemed as collectibles or keepsakes. Like when you tried to record something where there was no sound or no important quote unquote sound, you would get a recording, but it wouldn't show up in your journal. You couldn't recall it back.
Like there's some winds that weren't like necessarily thought of as recordables, but then turns out it was very cool.
And we had a lot of players, myself too, who were like, I want to just be able to record the wind and have it in my journal and listen back to it as part of my my own version of the story. So we rewrote the design of the whole audio system kind of around feedback like that we got.
Yeah, for sure there was some happy accidents too. Like we start populating the map with sound, and then turns out that the design team really likes one of the sounds we put somewhere. For instance, at some point in the game, we won't spoil anything, but there's a character that's sleeping, and Manu put a very cool snoring sound, and then of course, the writing team and everything wanted to have it as a collectible because it was so funny. So, there's happy accidents like that.
One of the things was really clear from a direction standpoint is this is a game where ambiences are important, right? They're not just setting or a backdrop, right? There's a level of environmental storytelling going on here that matters, right? Narratively, but also with regards to immersion, right? Hand placing those 3D emitters, making sure that you're tuning the mix across these different areas, right? To focus or de-emphasize other sounds, right? To help tell that story. So it's great to hear how much care you've taken to ensure that all speaks the language of the game.
Hello. I love you. Ice cream.
One thing that was really tricky was getting the musical collectibles not be mistaken for part of the score, because the score itself is very abstract and sort of floats in and out in this way that feels very natural to the Foley design. So when we had something like that pipe organ playing, a lot of people just walked by it not realizing that it was emitting sound because they thought that it was part of the score. So there was all these sort of like test cases that we had to sort of work through to land at what was the right approach. We had to rewrite the whole system multiple times as the way that we approached the narrative shifted. And the collectibles ended up being like the most crucial aspect of the recording. This was not just on the audio level, it was true for photographs too, where certain things, if they're in your camera purview, when you take photos of them, it triggers these poetic lines that the main character writes in her journal and speaks aloud.
A village that was created as a place to heal. Is that where my instinct to try to help comes from? It's so strange to imagine I'll be shaped by places and people I haven't met yet. So strange to imagine that I might feel at home somewhere else.
And so this is also true of the audio. So if the specific sounds that are deemed important in the narrative are within the recording that you make, it triggers these same things that you can then place within your journal. You can place the sounds themselves.
These birds migrate, but we don't know where they come from or where they're going.
Some of the keepsakes have a very specific design, and one example is the memory flowers, where actually those three states, like you hear them, normal hearing, recorder in hand, and actually recording. It's actually three different sounds. Maybe Spencer, you want to talk a bit about that?
These collectibles are some of the most important in teasing out the history behind the landscape. There's a very rough timeline that you sort of start to uncover about the history of what happened in this place. And these flowers are sort of like your only concrete glimpses into what happened, where these events took place.
People here are so weak.
I heard gunshots last night.
That was us. What is that?
Look at the pond, the water.
What is that?
Should we run or something?
This was a big sort of collaborative design between me and Kevin, where there were these flowers that feel like they have memories trapped inside of them. And the way that you sort of are able to experience what those memories are is by recording them. So there had to be 3 different versions of how they sounded. One, when you're walking around in the game and you sort of walk by them. There's a version where there's a very abstracted version of the memory, which has done a lot of sort of post-production tricks. Part of the requirements from design teams, they had to be unintelligible because we weren't able to have closed captioning for them. So it couldn't be something where you could understand what they're saying, because then we'd have to create some sort of system for taking those little snippets and translating each one in real time, and it was just not feasible. So it had to be scrambled enough where you couldn't really understand what they were saying, what they meant. And then there's a layer of this sort of like shimmering kind of drone kind of sound, which is some like FM synthesis kind of like upper particles kind of thing. And then when you pull out your recorder, you lose the sort of drone, and you just sort of hear these little shards shifting around. You sort of hear that there's something in there. You're not sure what exactly it is, but you hear little chunks of it more intelligibly. And then once you're recording it, you hear the actual memory. Although it's still a little abstracted, there's still a little bit of a vocoder kind of effect on it that's modulated by that drone sound, which is still kind of very faintly present when the voices sort of peek through more.
Please spare the people of this valley. We're so desperate for peace.
And this was kind of a time-consuming process because the game was localized in Japanese and in French, so we kind of had to do these 3 different layers in triplicate for every single version of the memory flower. So you can sort of hear that there's something there, you're not sure what exactly it is. There's also some VFX that go along with this.
This flower has a shimmering quality.
And I love the progressive disclosure of it. You start from like a wild abstraction. And then
I recognize you.
Yeah.
You're the famous doctor. That's your boy, the one with the visions.
It's surreal to find a piece of Dr. Fumio's past so far away from Cairo.
Yeah, it feels really good with the the Tempest audio too, when you're walking around, the way that they sort of catch in the binaural sphere.
Yeah, and the full screen visual effects were a great accompaniment. The way that the whole field of view shifted, it all really worked together. And that's another thread that just runs through this whole conversation, is how that collaboration across all the different elements of the experience are working together to communicate and to convey the message of season. So yeah, you can tell that that everyone's working together.
Absolutely. And more people finding these interactive experiences outside of the traditional game definition, I think, is one of the things that's exciting about the medium, the format, right? It continues to evolve, continues to grow into these diverse areas where people are able to tell their stories, they're able to bring their experiences, share those, and almost create, in the case of some of these moments, an empathy machine for the way that people experience the world. And that is certainly one of the strengths of the artistic mediums, to create these kind of feelings and emotions. And to be in a place where we're talking about games, you know, reaching people in these ways, I think it's a good sign of the medium, despite the layoffs and other job or workplace related challenges that we're facing as part of that growth as well, right?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I feel like in recent times, I've had really more experiences like that, playing games, like being really, emotional about things, and yeah, games like Pentiment, which I was talking about earlier, or games like The Last of Us. For me, they really bring the storytelling in games to a whole new level. And for me, I'm starting really to feel that games are becoming a mature medium to actually tell stories and make you feel emotions, and in a very different way than books do or films do, because in this case you are playing the characters, so you sometimes have to make choices, and you feel things in a very different way than films or books where you're just a spectator, you're not involved directly. But in games you can be involved directly. I feel like recently this power that you have while playing the game has started to really be leveraged into super interesting storytelling experiences. I'm really happy to see that medium that I love, growing and maturing and being able to really grow into that art form that it is already on many levels. But I feel like on the storytelling level, we have done really some great stuff recently.
There's this really interesting book this guy, Sethan Nguyen, wrote about how the sort of medium for art in games is actual agency itself. Like, agency is what you're working with as your sort of tool, and how that just sort of cracks open a whole other sort of way that you can sort of communicate with people in a way that film or like cinema is not really able to. I don't know. There's, I think, a lot of artistic potential for video games that it's starting to become more deeply explored. Obviously, there's a lot of really interesting experimental games over the history of gaming, but I think there's still a lot more that can be done. And I'm interested to see there's a lot of art galleries are starting to work. Like I saw the Serpentine Gallery in London commissioned an artist to make a game, and then it just becomes a whole other funding model of an art collector buys the actual object, quote unquote, of the game, and then the game is free to play. Like I saw the game that they released, you can just go and download it on Steam. So I think there's a lot of avenues for expression there that people need to look more into.
Yeah, totally. Agency. I think there's something to that as being at the core of processing the medium differently than you do in a passive way, for instance. It's cool to be growing up with these things, maturing, as you said, effects.
The necessity of day zero is not just psychological, it's ecological. As this cycles through the ecosystem, it creates points of pressure where things bleed, and soil and human minds are contaminated. Left alone, the haunted quality of this season will only get worse. This is not an endless cycle. We are putting an end to this psychoactive material, and we are opening up space for something new.
How do they plan to remove the haunted quality of this season?
When the technical pieces can just dissolve into the background and you're left with that emotional resonance of the experience, I think it really shines. And that's a tough thing to accomplish. So well done on that. Season is, a masterpiece of those details. And I'm sure we're only scratching the surface. Is there a Wilhelm scream buried in there somewhere?
I think so.
No.
We should have,
She set out to record life at the end of this season.
To make it real for people in the future. She asked us about living together.
And we asked her about traveling alone.
When the season turns, what will remain?
Only what she saw, what she captured.
She carries the sounds of the season with her. The way she listened made you want to tell her everything.
I got to look in her journal. The world was telling her its secrets. I think she even figured out what will happen to us when the season ends. Is it going? Is it gone?
Not yet.